Hey everyone, I've been really fortunate in my archery career to work with a lot of great coaches, both as a competitive archer and as bow hunter. So in this video, I want to pass on some of what I've learned from them to you guys and 10 archery tips for bow hunters. Okay, so our first tip is going to be to know the fundamentals of archery. The best archers in the world execute the fundamentals perfectly every time, and that's what we need to strive for, whether we're at a local 3D shoot or in the woods. So learning the fundamentals is really important. If you're a self-taught archer, maybe you haven't really looked over every little aspect of your form, how you do things. So whether it's how you grip the bow, how much bend is in your arm, or how your shoulders are aligned, how much string pressure you're putting when you're at anchor. If your head is tilted down like that, it really should be more in a neutral position. Little things like this can really make a big difference in archery. So how do you learn the fundamentals? Well, you can look on YouTube, look up, there's a lot of great archery videos out there on different aspects of form and, taking the knowledge that way. Or you can just schedule a 1-hour lesson at a local archery shop, and that coach will look over your form and they'll be able to tell you right away what you're doing good, what you're doing wrong, and how to fix it. And what happens when you're doing all the fundamentals right is your shot becomes more forgiving. Your bad shots aren't so bad, and that's a big deal in the woods because we're not usually shooting under ideal conditions, and there's usually a lot of adrenaline involved. So you need your bad shots to not be so bad. If your bad shot right now is 6-7 inches off to one side, whereas if you get your bad shots down to only 3 inches off to one side, that is a huge difference. So really learn the fundamentals and learn how to execute them properly. Tip number 2 is practice with a purpose. Every time you go out to shoot, you should have a goal in mind, something you're working on that day, whether you want to get it in some realistic practice where you're running through your shot routine every time, making sure you're picking your good shot placement shots and shooting down angles, whatever it's going to be that day. Or if you're working on a specific aspect of your form, make that your focus. I want to grip the bow the right way every single shot, or I want to have a really clean release every time today. Practice with a purpose and you'll see much better results. So tip number 3, setting in your bow at 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 yards. Even numbers like that that's fantastic. But what we want to do is make sure we're practicing all the yardages in between, and including up close to target, 5-10 yards, because you want to know where your bow is hitting at every single distance so you know how to compensate. Especially as you get past 25-30 yards, depending on your bow's speed, you'll notice much bigger discrepancies, and there's going to be a spot where in between 2 pins where that shot is going to hit closer to one pin than the other. And it's really good to know that because rarely do deer stand perfectly at 20 or 30 yards. Tip number 4 is to center your peep sight. So everyone knows that you should look through your peep sight and to your pins, but you want to take the circle that's created by your peep sight and center it in the circle that's created by your sight housing. So you have these 2 concentric circles, and when you align those two, it creates a really consistent anchor point, and that's going to make your shot more accurate, more forgiving, and more deadly in the woods. When we get nervous, we tend to take in shallow, short breaths or not breathe at all. And what that does is that increases our heart rate and makes us even more nervous. So an important thing to do is to take a deep breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth, really fill up your lungs, let it out slowly. You can do this before you shoot, anytime you're feeling a little nerves. If you want to work it into your shot routine, I think that's a great idea. And especially, when that deer's coming into range and you're feeling really nervous, center yourself by taking a good deep breath, and then it'll get you in the right state of mind to go through your shot routine. And that brings us to the next tip, which is to have a shot routine. You want to have steps that you say in your head every single time when you're shooting. Little checkpoints to make sure you're doing each step. And that's maybe not so important in the backyard, but that's going to be really important anytime you're shooting under pressure. Is people forget to do silly things like not even look through their peep sight, or they maybe they're shooting, a perfect release every time in the backyard, but when that deer comes in front of them, they hammer that release and really jerk the trigger. So you want to have shot sequence that you say in your head every time. It's going to be different for everyone. So just work out something that's going to make sense to you, but make sure it's hitting important steps along the shot routine. One of the most common questions in archery is, how do you aim steady? And the truth is, even top competitive archers, they're not aiming perfectly steady. Their pins are still going to move a little bit. And so the first question is, okay, how do you aim steady? We'll touch on that very quickly, and that's all about your form, how you're using your body. You want to use the least amount of muscle as possible, because muscles, they quiver, and those little vibrations, you'll see that in your sight. As well as your draw length is really important. So form, draw length are really the keys for holding steady. But the important thing that I want to touch on is not to over aim. So if your pin is moving around, but it's kind of floating back towards the center every time, that's perfectly good. What you want to do is, you don't want to try and fight the bow and try and control where your pin is going. You just want to get it to where you want it to go, and you want to focus on the spot you want to hit and just let your pin float, and then just execute your shot and trust that arrow is going to go there. Give that a try. I think you're going to have good luck with that. So last year, I grunted at a buck. He was about 150 yards away. He comes in, rubs a tree, and then he hits the trail that's right in front of me. It's about 10 yards away, and starts walking right in front of me. As he walks past the tree, I come to full draw, and of course he stops right behind that tree, and I'm at full draw for, I don't know, a long time, and I'm starting to shake, and so I decide to let down, and then he starts walking again, and then I get back to full draw, and then I execute a good shot on him, and is able to harvest that deer. But the important thing is being able to let down smoothly, quietly, without a lot of movement, because that's something that happens while you're hunting. Is you'll be at full draw, and that shot doesn't present itself like you thought it would, and eventually you're gonna have to put the bow down. So if you're letting down and a big movement and your arrow is falling off the arrow rest, causing a big ruckus, that's not going to work out. So you really want to practice and be able to let your bow down really smoothly. So maybe you want to turn down the bow a turn or two, or work out your system so you can let it down really smooth. One of the biggest issues across all archers is punching the trigger. So this is when you're at full draw, your finger's off the trigger, and something in your brain says shoot now, and you hammer that trigger without smoothly touching it and squeezing that trigger. So there's a lot of different ways that you can fix that bad habit. And if you just have someone record you shooting your bow, especially all the cell phones have slow motion mode now. If you do that, you'll be able to see if you are punching the trigger, and if you are, there's a few different ways you can break that bad habit. What I would recommend is, if you have a really light trigger, to increase the amount of tension it requires to set that trigger off. Make it a little heavier, a lot heavier actually, and then you can work your way back off of that. But what you want to be able to do is, at full draw, just touch the trigger, lay your finger on it, and from there, that's when you're going to start your shot process. Your pin goes to where you want it, you're okay, and then your focus is on the spot, and then you're just slowly applying pressure to your trigger, and you want to maintain, the tension that you're holding the bow back with. How I would recommend doing that is, think of like a string tied to your elbow that's being pulled back and around your head, and you're just gonna slowly increase pressure until the shot breaks. It should be somewhat of a surprise, and that's gonna be a really cleanly executed release. Other options are, you could, instead of using an index finger release, you can use a hinge or a tension activated release. Those work well too. The other thing, which kind of brings us to our next tip, is an aiming drill. For more serious issues, where if you find that you can't put your pin anywhere near the target without releasing, That's just like the beginning symptoms of target panic. Levi Morgan put out a great series on target panic. It's like a 4-part series. Highly recommend if you're having troubles with that to go ahead and watch that, because he dives deep into that subject. But a simple thing you can do if you're having that issue where anytime the pin is on the target or near it, you can't help but release. What you want to do is keep your finger behind the trigger, aim at the target, and just stay there as long as you can. Let that pin float, try and relax as much as you can, and then let down. And what you're doing is you're teaching your brain that just because the pin is there doesn't mean you're going to shoot. And after you do that for a little while, you'll kind of break yourself of that habit. It's helped me a lot in the past, and I hope it helps you too. Now, similar to that story that I mentioned earlier, you can find yourself in these situations in the woods where you're at full draw for a long time, and then the shot opportunity presents itself, and you still need to execute a really good shot even though you're really exhausted. So practicing those long holds, 30 seconds, minute and a half, 2 minutes, for as long as you can, hold at full draw, and then when you're feeling tired, you have to just think about it as resetting your brain, like, okay, the shot starts now, not I'm just going to shoot right now. As soon as the shot presents itself, just reset yourself, aim, and then do your best to execute a good shot. But practicing that will make it much easier when you get into the woods. Alright, so those are my 10 archery tips. I hope it helps all of you who are practicing, getting ready for bow season, and good luck this year. We'll see you on the next video.